Good evening, Maverick family. Welcome back. You know where you are. You're watching the Maverick News Channel. Welcome home. Great to have everybody here. We will be talking with Kevin Michelizzi tonight in Crimea, our Maverick News contributor from over there. And we are going to get a different perspective on the Tucker-Carlson Vladimir Putin interview. Kevin has been speaking to people over there to get a Russian perspective for us. He has been producing some video material. He has been really kind of digging into it, analyzing it, and he'll share his observations and analysis with us tonight. And he's also going to tell us about the kinds of media reports that are now flowing in response to that milestone or historic interview, even some people are saying, with Vladimir Putin. So he'll explain what he is seeing over there. He'll fill us in and also talk to us about the kind of propaganda that people in Russia are being subjected to after this interview between this American journalist and the president of Russia. Stay with me.
Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News, Maverick News. Defending free speech, free speech. Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Kevin Michelizzi, welcome back to the program. Great to have you here again. Thank you for joining us.
Always glad to be here, Rick. Thanks for inviting me again.
I'm excited to talk to you today because we had probably, the biggest media event of the year just in the last couple of days, if not maybe the decade. The Tucker Carlson interview with Vladimir Putin. Give me your first impressions, and I'm excited to hear from you because you're sitting over there in Crimea with a different perspective.
Well, for me, Putin totally controlled that interview, and Tucker was way out of his league. I think Tucker Carlson went into it with an idea of, I'm going to ask these questions and I'm going to accomplish this. And it was painfully obvious that he had absolutely no control over that interview at all.
Yeah, I said something very similar, but I think you were a little more polished in your delivery on that front. It was very obvious from the beginning that Putin had the upper hand, especially starting with that half-hour history lesson, which I know that sort of annoyed Tucker Carlson a little bit. He wanted to just get to the point, but Putin was like, no, you need to know this.
Yeah, are we doing a show or are we having a conversation?
A talk show, talk show or serious conversation, which really instantly put Tucker Carlson in his place.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Putin is a master at controlling the situation like that. And, some of the propaganda I've seen, I saw the reports today from like the Wall Street Journal, and I've actually got a video coming out a little later tonight that actually calls out the actual propaganda there, where they say that he accused the journalist that's in jail, falsely accused him of espionage. And, this was part of the interview. And what they were saying in this article was that Putin, falsely accused him, and he went on a rant. That seems to be the Western press's favorite word these days, is Putin is ranting. But he very calmly said, the guy was caught doing this, and that's espionage. And just to make sure my mind is still there on things like that, I went out to the Department of Defense and looked up their definition of espionage. And it is, gathering confidential information illegally. So this journalist, if it had been a Russian journalist, if it had been an American journalist collecting the same kind of information this guy did, he would have gone to prison in the United States. So, the spin on it is amazing. I saw another Western article today. It said Tucker Carlson's connection with Russia has been revealed. In 2006, he performed in the American show Dancing with the Stars with his Russian partner, Yelena Granko. Now, I don't know if it's true or not.
He was on Dancing. It is true. He was on Dancing with the Stars.
Okay, well, but it's definitely his tie to Putin. So
okay.
he's obviously a Putin puppet.
I've forgotten
Dance with a Russian.
That.
What more does it take?
That's it. That's it. If you speak to a Russian, you're an operative. If you dance with one, you're a spy.
That's right.
Well, no wonder. Right? His dad's partner was absolutely compromised him. Right? It's the oldest trick in the book. You use a sexy dance partner to get
the Red Sparrow technique.
He had to get state secrets on national television while she was whispering. Well, he was whispering state secrets into her ear.
Yeah,
that's hilarious. I'd totally forgotten about that.
Yeah. But the whole rant thing, it's like, well, you went on a rant about the history, and they said Tucker Carlson was annoyed, and that's where they stop. Well, Carlson was annoyed at first, but at the end of the interview, he did his after video, and he says, I was annoyed. I didn't want to go into the history, but he says, when he finished it, I understood. He was laying the groundwork for the question I asked him. So, and, Putin certainly is not a ranter.
Yeah, he spelled out his reasons. He gave a very reasoned response with evidence and documentation. So, the thing that the thing that struck me about it is it was clear Putin knew that question was coming, and he came prepared. Not just with a verbal explanation, but documents to back up what he was saying. So very thorough.
Yeah,
and that wasn't a rant.
Nighttime toilet reading.
That was, yes, yeah, that was not a rant. That was a learned history lesson for someone who was otherwise ignorant, who needed to know.
Well, reality is a lot of Westerners would fall asleep during that first 30 minutes. Yeah. I don't think that was his point. I think it was really trying to educate people about, Russian history, the Russian Empire's history. And, like I say, I've got a video coming out here in just a little bit that, the gentleman is a former Ukrainian Soviet citizen, and he explained to me that Russians, a lot of times, he said he even did that with his former girlfriend. she would ask him a question and he felt like he had to give her context. So he would start back at Adam and Eve and go forward from there. And, if you understand the Russian mindset, this is what they do. I often complain to my wife. I ask her what time it is. She tells me how to build a watch. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, when you watch that, it's all very convincing. It is a history lesson. History is, of course, that was open to interpretation, so I can understand how some people might want to, rebut some of what he said. But I was appreciative of listening to that because it does give proper context, and I don't think people here in the West have any idea, no clue as to what Russian history is about. We don't
exactly.
learn about that over here. Not at all. So it was absolutely necessary for people to understand where he's coming from when he says that Ukraine has always sort of been part of Russia. So I understand the argument.
Yeah. Except for the part that was Poland.
Well, I mean, and then, whenever it's something political, I always say that where history comes into play, any politician or world leader is going to have their view of history because there can be many views of history. So that's something academic and is maybe open for more discussion or scrutiny by historians who are other politicians. So I always try to look at both sides of the story, but yeah, I get it. And this thing with the Wall Street Journal journalist Evan Gershkovich, I can never pronounce his name right, Gershkovich. Yeah, I mean, the law is the law is the law. And even with Julian Assange, I'm always trying to remain sort of neutral on it, be open to looking at all sides of the issue. The same thing with this particular case here, and Russian law applies to this Wall Street Journal journalist who is now in jail. If you're over there, and I can't say for sure what the evidence is, but if someone is taking in secret information from the government and you're in their country, and that's an illegal activity, then that's an illegal activity, whether you're a journalist or not. So
yeah, you only get the side where the American journalist got arrested, but so did the guy that was giving him the information. There was actually an exchange of confidential information.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And, his argument is, the journalist's argument is, well, I was just doing journalism. Well, you were receiving top secret information. They say, Julian Assange, you could apply the same thing there, and the United States is. Mm-hmm. Now, the difference is the United States is reaching overseas and pulling them in. Russia got this guy in the country.
Right. Yep. And then I guess you start to look at, the new rules-based international order and who, jurisdiction and sovereignty and all of these questions come into play, and how much reach does the United States, are they allowed to have around the world? So, I mean, those are, some of the other issues here, but not that I want to get into the Assange thing. I'm just saying I'm always trying to sort of remain neutral as a journalist and remain open to all sides of an argument. But even in this case, as Putin is laying out his case, the guy's in Russia. He's, it's not, there's no special immunity for a journalist when it comes to, taking in or getting secret government documents.
Yeah. And the other thing people need to understand is that the United States applies the U.S. law to everybody in the world. But the U.S. law is not Russian law. It's not, it's not German law. It's not Chinese law. And they do vary, it's
from country to country to country. Yeah.
The basketball player, the oils, the, THC oils or whatever she had.
Right.
Perfectly legal in the United States. Yeah. Here, it's a 10-year prison sentence.
Yeah, what was her name? I don't follow women's basketball.
I don't remember.
Grimes? No, that's
Her.
no. Um, I can't remember her name. I just don't follow women's basketball.
Yeah, I don't
Um,
either.
I'll get her name here. Brittany Griner.
Brittany
Yeah,
Grimes, yeah.
Brittany Griner. Yeah, Grimes is
Griner.
Elon Musk's love interest. Oh man, my
Yeah.
oh the names. It's just it's so crazy. The other thing that really put Tucker back on his heels, I think, is when Putin made reference to Tucker's desire at one point to work for the CIA. I had no idea. What was your reaction to that?
Uh, it doesn't surprise me. And it just shows that Putin is prepared for any situation he goes into. You can see the former KGB in him. And, people say, oh, well, it's the people he surrounds himself with, and he makes these things up. But think about it. He went through that 2-hour interview with no cue cards, no teleprompter, just off the top of his head. And he can spew facts and dates. No, the guy I was interviewing today about it, he said Putin showed his human side. He said for him it was good because Putin showed that he was a real human being, because he did have a couple of minor mistakes in his history. Maybe it was a year off in dates, or just a couple of minor things throughout the interview that weren't quite correct. Most of them he caught himself and corrected. But can you imagine Joe Biden going for 2 hours in an interview and remembering his name without a cue card?
Well, all this is going on with Putin. Biden is over here, you know, suffering under a barrage of media scrutiny because of his memory issues.
Yeah.
What a contrast. Over here, it looks like such a clown show.
Yeah.
I, it really so all this against a backdrop of propaganda, and we were bombarded with propaganda leading up to the interview. Now we're getting the after interview propaganda with a variety of narratives. But after
the EU
the
wanted to sanction him.
yeah. I don't know that any of that has actually happened, but I guess it remains to be seen. But I'm interested to find out what kind of information or information warfare you've been seeing where you're at, because surely you're receiving, or people in your area in Crimea are being subjected to different kinds of messaging than we're getting here.
Well, as it comes to this interview, it's almost like the Russians have been worshiping Tucker Carlson for having the nerve to come and talk to Vladimir Putin. Now, they also have been saying Tucker Carlson is the only Western journalist who has come to Russia to interview Putin in the last 2 years. And that's not true. He's the only one who's gotten an interview with Putin. But there have been several journalists who have come here and wanted to interview him. Most of them get turned away. And, Putin isn't going to sit down with the Wall Street Journal. They've got a bureau chief in Moscow. I've spoken to her. And, she can't get in to see him. BBC has been banned in Moscow. So primarily because of, them pulling off Russian channels in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
So we do hear, the Russian side of things. And, most Russians are bright enough to look beyond what the government is telling them and what the state media is telling them, and to look beyond that. but then we don't have, Western news censored from us. If you listen to the Russian news, the propaganda we get here is, Joe Biden is an absolute idiot.
That's not necessarily propaganda.
Well, maybe, but let's be as tactful as Putin. This is it isn't my position to diagnose him. So
That's right. Oh my. So over in your area, you're still getting sort of unfiltered Western media, and you can still watch all of that.
oh, absolutely. That's where, if you look at my videos that I've been putting out on this, I'm poking fun at the Western media. I have access to all of it.
Okay. And after the interview, a lot like social media, I think, is really where you're getting, a lot of propaganda
Yeah.
from a lot of different sources. Here, before the interview actually dropped, there was a transcript that came out the night before. And
Yeah.
it was a
I saw that on your
transcript
show.
of,
Yeah.
and I'm like, how, first of all, it made no sense to me. Why would Tucker allow it to be released unless Putin would release it? But he has no real reason to do that.
Nah.
So that didn't make sense. Why would it even be out there? Then I read it, and it just seemed like it was just full of cliches. It was telling a story that I knew some people wanted to hear, and but it didn't make sense to me. Didn't sound like what Vladimir Putin would say. I knew the interview was 2 hours long. The transcript was only 2 pages, so there was no way that that was the entire transcript.
Right.
Then I went searching, and I found that the Kremlin had actually responded to questions about it from at least one other media outlet, and had issued a statement as a response, and they said that it was fake. So I was like, this is fake.
Yeah.
100% fake.
And in the end, now, if you go and you compare it, it's totally different.
It's totally different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
it was good guesses as to what Putin would say, but they weren't answers that he would give.
right. That's exactly right. So
Yeah.
they're saying this is not accurate. No way. Can't
Yeah.
be. And then the
He's-
interview. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, he's too smooth.
Oh yes, yes, yeah. And he's too diplomatic, right? He's
Yeah.
not. Some of the language it's just too blunt for him. So there was just no way that that was authentic. So I alerted people because I think that I don't think anybody should be out there putting words into Vladimir Putin's mouth. I think it can actually be dangerous, especially given the current political situation that we're facing and the possibility of war escalating. So then this interview drops, and then what have you been seeing online since then, in terms of propaganda or responses or information? You put out a video yesterday, I think, that laid out some of what you've been seeing.
Yeah, I did yesterday and again today. So, some of the things I've seen that I haven't put in videos yet is I see a lot of news that, the questions were curated. Putin had them in advance. It was one of the requirements that Tucker gave them to him. No, it very well could be, but the man still answered any questions off the top of my head. He's the president of the largest territory on the earth. And, it isn't like Tucker Carlson shows up, gives them a list of questions, and, and a day later they sit down and, Putin's memorized all this stuff because he had nothing else to do. We see on a daily basis, Putin has talked to this world leader. He's attended this summit. He's done this. I don't know how he does it. So a lot of the social media propaganda is, the questions were known in advance. Tucker was only allowed to ask what he was told he could ask. And that isn't Tucker Carlson either. I think Tucker asks what he wants to ask, but I also think he understands the mindset much better. He says he's never been in Russia, but, maybe because of his dance partner. But, it's just a different mindset. A lot of these Western journalists come in and Putin will try to answer something and they'll try to drive the conversation and Putin will get in their face about it. And Tucker didn't do that. So he handled it well, but it was like a fifth grader interviewing the university professor.
Yes.
Social media on the Russian side, there's a lot of, Putin has done our country great good and the whole world will know that we're right and, we are not a bad country. And reality is the only people who are going to listen to that are the people who already understand that or believe that. It isn't going to change any minds. It really, the Westerners who are against Russia are going to continue bashing it. So, all you have to do is open up your phone, open up Telegram, and, you're lambasted with propaganda.
So you don't think that the interview was strong enough to sway public opinion a little bit one way or the other?
No.
I'm not so
I
sure.
think the pro-Ukrainian, anti-Russian guys will remain pro-Ukrainian, anti-Russia. I think the pro-Russian, anti-Ukrainian guys will remain pro-Russian. Maybe some people who are on the fence will go out and actually look at things for a change. That's a possibility. I mean, that's what I encourage people to do, is actually look at a story and look at the other side. And this is really where I give Tucker Carlson respect. He said this in his pre-video. Why am I doing this? Because I'm a journalist. So he's doing what other people should have been doing. Quite honestly, he's doing what Western diplomats should be doing, going and talking to the other side. So if nothing else, I hope people will see that there's a benefit to hearing the other side, whether you agree with it or not. Maybe you will learn a little something.
Yeah, I agree with that. And so you see this almost as a peace mission?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Knowing Tucker Carlson, I'd see it as a, because he had the contact, is make Tucker Carlson a bunch of money mission. So
That's true. That's very true. Why do you think Vladimir Putin decided to speak to Tucker Carlson, but not other journalists who put in the request?
I think because Putin knows that Tucker Carlson would not be one of those brash Western journalists who comes in and tries to lambaste him and drive the conversation. Even when I've seen these people come in, the CNN guys in particular, when they interview him, they don't care what he has to say. They have their questions. They want the answer that they want. And if they don't get it, then they're going to beat on Putin about it. Now, Putin still maintains his calm. He still will stop them and say, let me answer the question you asked, much like he did with Tucker. But I think he knew that with the way Tucker Carlson has been with his, quite honestly, pro-Russian stance on things. He says he's neutral and he wants people to make up their own minds, but historically he's been pro-Russian. He sees the fallacy in, this war. And, I think he's intelligent enough that Putin said, I can have a conversation with this man. I can present our side of the story and put it out there. maybe some people will learn the truth about the Minsk agreements, twice the Minsk agreements. I learned through that interview, I wasn't aware of this, there was actually an agreement before the Minsk agreements that the Germans and I don't remember who he said signed. That was before the Minsk agreements. And they didn't keep that either. So, my biggest fear in this interview is that a lot of the Westerners are going to look at it and say Putin was lying. Because that's what they've been told over and over and over. I'm even seeing that propaganda in the Western press right now. Is Putin lied about this, he lied about that. He lied about being a Christian man. He's going out and killing people, and no Christian man would do that. Well, they're kind of taking what Tucker asked him and what he answered, and they're twisting it a little bit. Nothing they're saying is false, but this is propaganda. It isn't always a falsehood. It's just kind of twisting it a little bit so that, it means something different than what was said. No, yeah. Putin is a Christian man. Russia's a primarily Christian nation, has been for a long time. But Putin was very clear to point out Buddhists, Muslims, Islamists, they all live here and they live in peace together. They respect each other. But this is a predominantly Orthodox Christian nation. Putin goes to church. He isn't let me go on Christmas and I'll wave at the news reporters and say, see what a godly man I am. He goes to church. He celebrates the holidays with his people, not just a church, like in the US, the presidents go to a particular church. He goes to whatever church in the area he happens to be. He'll actually travel to go to another one for a religious holiday. So he does believe in this, but on the other hand, a leader of a country has to do what a leader of a country thinks he has to do.
How do people over there view Tucker Carlson?
Oh, they think he is an absolute godsend. What would they have done without sending Tucker Carlson to bring Putin's message to the world? And again, it's kind of a skewed viewpoint, but, this is what people think of it.
Pretty interesting stuff. Where do you think things go from here, Kevin? Is this going to die down? I did see a report, and I don't know if it's true, that Tucker Carlson followed up his interview with Vladimir Putin by interviewing Edward Snowden. Had you heard that, or is there any confirmation of that out there that you've seen?
I haven't heard that. I've seen rumors of it,
yeah.
But I do know that Tucker Carlson left Moscow the next day.
Okay, so I don't know that can even be possible. So that in itself could be a bit of a misdirection.
It is possible because they actually recorded this interview on the 6th. So 2 days before it was released.
All right. Yeah, I think over here, the public's attitude toward the war is shifting. It has been for a while. There's less and less support for the war, and more and more pressure coming online to discontinue the funding and the supply of arms to Ukraine. And then you're seeing the Republicans over here putting pressure on the Democrats through this issue indirectly by tying it to the border issue on the U.S.-Mexico border, saying, if the Democrats don't, lock down that border, we're not going to support any more funding for Ukraine. It's very interesting how this is playing out. And then that all is tied to this idea that the United States might, be plunged into some sort of a civil war. And you see Marjorie Taylor Greene saying that what's needed is a national divorce. It's amazing how this whole thing with Tucker Carlson and the war in Ukraine has now provided such blowback into the United States that there are even people, and I don't know how close we really are to the country breaking up. I think we're still a long way off from that. But
I
just
do
even
too.
having that
Yeah.
narrative out there, I'm like amazed that people are, even talking that way. And it's all kind of tied to what happened over there with Tucker and Vladimir Putin. Amazing stuff.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to me that you have Republicans that have no intention of giving money to Ukraine, saying they'll give money to Ukraine by tying it to what they know the Democrats aren't going to fund. So they're both refusing to fund one side or the other, and yet both saying, well, if you fund our side, then we'll fund your side. And it's all, again, I have to use the word propaganda just so people get used to the fact that it isn't necessarily, telling lies to people. You have an election coming up in the United States. The Democrats want to win. The Republicans want to win. So they're going to do everything that they can. Now, I think I don't remember if it was my first video or second video that I sent to you. They had some of the politicians talking about, there were, Tucker Carlson was pro-Russian. He went there and interviewed Putin. He's a traitor. And then they say, but we had 8 Republican senators there celebrating the 4th of July in Moscow. And this guy interviewed Putin, and this guy went over there. So Republicans are all puppets of Putin. Now, what I hear in that is Republicans are bad, vote Democratic. We could make the other argument, and it would be equally fair for the Republicans to say, well, the Democrats went to Ukraine. They gave them money. They gave them weapons. They're all bad. Vote Republican. And this is what I'm hearing on all this. For me, it's just a conditioning people for this upcoming election in the United States. I think it is nothing more than that.
What did you make of the references to Canada in this interview? And again, talking about the Ukrainian SS officer Yaroslav Hunka appearing in Parliament, and what Vladimir Putin had to say about that. What did you make of that?
I think it was his, poke at Canada in, gee, you're a harbor for Nazis too. Now, it started in the context of ultra nationalists in Ukraine, and then what does denazification mean, and so it was kind of a poke at the West in general. I think Canada just happened to be the weak kid standing in front of the group that got punched in the nose. But yes, they have Nazis in Ukraine. They have some Nazis in Ukraine. They have ultra nationalists in Ukraine, certainly Banderites, but the United States has them too. The Ku Klux Klan is a classic example. They've got, all these, I'm not going to poke at MAGA people, but, they've got their right-wing nationalists as well. So, again, here's some of the propaganda you're getting from Russia. I know there's a big Ukrainian population in Vancouver, and they did, I don't know, purposefully or otherwise, have this SS guy. And, you've got Zelensky, clapping, and, all of them clapping. And I debate if any of them really had any idea, other than maybe Zelensky. I think it comes down to just Putin getting to take and punch somebody in the West in the eye.
Yeah.
I don't view Canada as having a big Nazi problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there are some. There
Yeah.
are some. There are some in Russia. There are some in Ukraine. There are some in the United States. There are some in Canada. Uh,
Yeah. Small little pockets of neo-Nazism out there, no doubt about it. And that guy
yeah,
absolutely was a World War II SS um, soldier. So, no question about it. I just think that it was ignorance, lack of education. You have a bunch of
yeah,
members of parliament who probably didn't even read the agenda because they're lazy,
yep,
and they on cue stood up like a bunch of trained seals and just applauded for some guy up on the second level who is
yeah.
like, yay, not realizing what the heck had just happened. But that's me.
Well, it reminds me of the U.S. Congress doing it when Zelensky comes and gives them a Ukrainian flag, and
Hmm.
Pelosi wraps it around her shoulders. Showmanship.
Right. Yeah. Oh man. I'm not sure where to go with the interview from here. Is there much of a difference then, Kevin? Do you think between the messaging that you guys are getting over there from the American side? Because today I'm looking at online and I see clips of Chris Wallace, who says that Tucker Carlson calling Tucker Carlson a useful idiot is an insult to useful idiots, and then of course criticizes Tucker Carlson, saying that he threw Vladimir Putin softballs. Um, I didn't know this, but Chris Wallace had at some point in the past had interviewed Vladimir Putin, and I think he did exactly what you suggested many Western journalists do. Is he went in there with antagonistic questions for Vladimir
Yes.
Putin, saying, "How come so many of your opponents end up dead?" Right? Not very tactful, and he ran that little clip in the middle of his criticism of Tucker Carlson. So that's the kind of stuff we're getting over here. Is that Tucker Carlson is a Russian stooge, that he's just he's a mouthpiece for the Kremlin, that he has no credibility, that Vladimir Putin has been lying, lied through the whole interview, shouldn't pay attention to it. It's just, it's a barrage of that right now.
Yeah, we see that over here, but we see it from the West. Here again, it is, they appreciate that Tucker Carlson did what he did. They really believe that if Tucker Carlson wanted to, that all he would have to do is ask Putin, and Putin would give him, citizenship and a job in the Russian media. And, is it true? Who knows? But that's the kind of things we're hearing over here. We do see both sides of the picture, and it's, I hate to say the Russians are just as brainwashed in things as Westerners, but this is what they're getting is, this was the best thing to happen, and
So
give the
this,
guy a job, give him
yeah.
citizenship, let him live here. And
So
quite
this,
honestly,
yeah,
if he
yeah.
wanted to, they probably would let him.
Yeah, yeah. At this point, I would say they probably would. Yeah. Uh, Journalist or propagandist in your view?
Carlson,
Yeah.
I wouldn't call him a propagandist, but I would say he's a shrewd journalist who knows how to run with a story to make himself money. Allegedly.
Mm-hmm. And
I think he is a skilled journalist. I do. I do think his questions were a little soft, but I don't know if they were soft because he went in expecting to give soft questions, or if it was the fact that he was just intimidated by Putin.
I think that's a pretty fair assessment. I think you have to go into an interview like that feeling intimidated. I think you have to be mindful of the situation you are in, the kind of person you are interviewing. And I think people should be mindful of that in this way. You know, you can't go into that interview with a man as powerful as Putin without in the back of your head thinking, how am I going to get out of this country? Without him landing in jail or something, right? Same thing if I, like, even here, I have the same thing in the back of my head when I'm talking about Justin Trudeau. Like, is he going to freeze my bank accounts or am I going to end up in
Yes.
jail, right? It's like you're always gauging who it is you're speaking to and you're adjusting the tone of your questions accordingly, right?
Yeah.
Even if for no other reason than simply to be respectful. And I think that
Yeah.
he wasn't antagonistic. He did ask some tough questions, but I could see as well that, you know, there were some things like that he wanted to get answers to. So he was careful about asking those, but they weren't antagonistic questions. I think he genuinely wanted Putin to explain why this special military operation was launched. Explain to the people why. That was, I think, integral. That's why he started with it. But then other questions, instead of doing the Chris Wallace, why do so many of your opponents end up dead? And he could have done that even with maybe a reference to the Prigozhin plane crash, right?
Yeah.
But didn't do that. He asked more from a philosophical point of view. How do you, as a world leader, reconcile being a Christian or religious man
and killing all these people? Yeah.
killing people, which is what any world leader is always faced with, right? If you have to go to war or defend your country in some way, you sometimes have to give the order to kill people. And that is something that I've thought of, you know, I don't know if I'd want the job because of that reason.
I wouldn't. But, you know, the people who would go in there like the Chris Wallace and say, well, but you aren't a Christian because you do this.
Right.
A guy like that has actually never read the Bible. You know, when that question came up and they were discussing it, I was really surprised that Putin didn't point out that there's been holy wars for an awful long time, and the Christians tend to be the worst at killing people.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as the worst killers of people.
Yes. Yeah, historically, that's true. You know, I think sometimes of world leaders as like gangsters in that respect, you know. And so it's when you have that much power, I think that it is it's very tempting to abuse it. You know, power can be very corrupting, and I think that, you know, I did watch just before we came online, Tucker Carlson's video that he posted post Putin interview, giving his own reaction to it, and you know, he talked about how the West, and it is true, you know, that they wanted the United States has been trying to destabilize Russia and even maybe break it up, right? And he's like, "Are you crazy?" And I think I agree with him that you do not want a destabilized Russia. You don't want a weak leader presiding over a country that has, if not the largest, maybe the second largest nuclear stockpile in the world. You want to divide that up a bunch of weirdos no.
Yeah, I agree, because any one of them or many of them would be willing to say, okay, I'm going to push the button.
Yeah. So
you know, the one thing that I have to say Tucker Carlson had a big set of brass cojones on is asking for the release of that journalist. I can't imagine he really had expectations that Putin would say, Oh, well, Tucker, buddy, old pal, you asked me, so yeah, here you go. Go pick them up, take them home with you. I can't believe that Tucker Carlson really believed that would happen. But I have seen, even in the Russian media now, all these stories coming out today that there's a chance that Putin will let him go. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen unless the United States trades somebody. But I don't know. I can't figure out what Tucker Carlson was expecting to get out of that question.
I would think that if nothing else, just to draw attention to it and maybe uh, push a little bit to get some momentum going to
Yeah.
maybe in the end affect a release of some kind, just to get something going with it, because it has been sort
A
of
year.
stagnant. Yeah, it's just been
Yeah.
it's idle, right? So I
Oh,
can
because
understand
nobody's
that.
talking to each other.
Right.
I think that was tough questions that Carlson gave him. Is why haven't you spoken to Biden? You've got this going on, and yes, the Ukrainians say they won't negotiate. So I understand that you can't negotiate with them, even though you're willing. But why haven't you picked up the phone and called Biden? I think that was a fair question, and I don't know that Putin's response was really reasonable.
Mm. Speaking of, negotiations, a couple of references in that interview to sitting down at the table to talk peace. So, in that way, I think the interview was very positive, because
Yeah.
if Joe Biden isn't willing to pick up the phone to call, or pick the phone up to answer a call from Putin, and Putin hasn't seen a point in trying to talk to Biden, then or Zelensky, then maybe this interview is first step toward that, and in that way maybe he was a
A
peace
peace
emissary.
plan. Yeah.
Do you,
And I found his answer about Zelensky and ending the war to be factual. He did run on a platform of bringing peace to eastern Ukraine, and then didn't follow through with it. But I think it was. I can't say it was a naive answer, because Putin is anything but naive. But to say, well, yes, he has, nationalists in his government, and they tell him what he can and can't do, but he's the president of the country. He should just do it. And, for a Putin, that's perfectly reasonable. Putin would simply say, you will do this. So I think it was kind of a naive view of Zelensky. Zelensky, yeah, he's Jewish, and Zelensky, yeah, he's president, but after the coup in 2014, the nationalists have run that government.
do you think he
And
was? Yeah.
we often hear that if he was to say, you know what, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to negotiate, or even if he was going to sign that peace accord in Turkey, that they would just eliminate him. He wouldn't wake up the next morning. As they say in Russia and Ukraine, he would commit suicide with 2 bullets to the back of his head.
Right. Do you think Putin was trying to send a message? I mean, obviously he's trying to send a message, but when he says, let's come to the table and negotiate peace, what I was getting from it was like, talk peace now. It's time to end this thing. Let's sit down and come to a resolution on this war, but it's going to be on his terms, right?
Yes.
So, but if you don't, it's going to get a whole lot worse, is the
Yeah.
unspoken part of this that I was getting from the interview.
Yeah. And rumors here, this is kind of what we hear on this end, is that he fully intends to take everything on the east side of the Dnieper River and down around under Odessa. because he feels that's the only way he can prevent Crimea from ever being attacked.
Right. And here in the West, the powers that be seem to think that a peace deal has to involve Putin giving up Crimea. And I just can't see that happening at all. So I think the people here are insane.
It won't ever happen. Actually, I hear rockets going over us right now. So,
are you being serious?
Yeah, I'm being serious.
Oh my God.
It was a launch from us towards Ukraine.
So the war continues over there in a very real way for you.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
We had 10 or 11 drones the other night that were shot down. Yeah, it's a daily thing here.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, I'm sorry to hear that. It's unfortunate that you're living in that reality. Over here, I can tell you that people are still very insulated for Canadians, and I think probably for most Americans, unless they've been to war. This is like watching a movie, so it's not real for people. Even these discussions are very, I think, to them, academic and maybe a form of, unfortunately, entertainment, because we've just never had to live through it. And I pray that we don't have to endure that. But
well, you too can send a check to Ukraine and have your name written on a shell to be fired at Russia.
Right. Yeah.
Or the opposite way.
Yes. Yeah. And hope, I hope that things don't destabilize over here, but the way the world is going, and with those rockets flying over your head, all I can say is pray for peace and hope that the call for negotiations and for both sides to come to the table, which Vladimir Putin spoke of in that interview, I hope that does come to fruition.
Yeah, I agree.
Is there anything else you'd like to add, Kevin? It's been, we're just getting near the top of the hour here, so probably time to wrap up. I'll just throw it over to you for a final thought.
Yeah. Anything that I've said about people listening to the other side of the story when it comes to the Putin interview, you have to do the same thing with any of the conflicts going on right now. Israel, Hamas, the Palestinians. Pull the Palestinians out of it, other than the fact that they're a bunch of people who are getting slaughtered. When you look at Hamas and Israel, they're both masters at propaganda. And I'll be taking some pokes at them on my information warfare channel here shortly. So, just look at both sides of the story. Pretend you're a diplomat. Listen to both sides. Look where people agree, where they have their differences, and make your decision on things based on that. Same thing I say every time.
That's right. And just tell people again how they can view your work when you're not here.
Well, I stole your banners in the studio today, so here's both my channels. I'm actually splitting the information warfare stuff off onto a different channel. So right now I'm streaming that stuff on both channels, but we'll take it primarily to the InfoWars Press channel soon. The other one, you want to hear about life in Russia, what it's like to live in Crimea near a war zone, what life is like on a daily basis. Go to the American Crimea channel instead.
Excellent. All right, Kevin Michelizzi, thank you. As always, a privilege.
Thanks, Rick. It is my privilege to be with you.
Maverick News. Join us. The world is watching.